things. It was such a controlled environment. And being a leftist, being a liberal, was all about accepting everybody's thoughts and speech and whatnot. So, that's really what we got. Danny Shaw is coming to the show. I know he ain't got much time. Danny, I don't know if you ever met Courtney. She was at the Rage Against the War Machine. I didn't introduce you. Danny, this is Courtney. Courtney, this is Danny. This is one of my
how you doing?
comrades that was in Nicaragua. I just met him in where we met in Brazil, right? Goes to Cuba a lot and whatnot. So he's coming to the show today. Danny, we're talking about censorship. We were talking about what happened in Tennessee, the way they expelled a couple of assemblymen from speaking. They took them out because they went marching with these kids who want gun control. Now, I asked Courtney before we played the last video. I'm interested to hear your point of view, because you're a leftist of sorts. You're an anti-imperialist leftist. But in the States, what is left and right anymore? Courtney, you start off. Where do you stand on gun control in this situation? Do you think there should be a ban on assault weapons? Do you think that they should arm teachers to protect children? Where are your thoughts? Because back in the days, me and Fiorella, we were big time. No, we have to disarm the public. There's too many crazies out there. They can't get guns. What are your thoughts on the Second Amendment now?
I mean, I think everybody feels like I need a gun, right? Doesn't everybody feel like that? I would say like I'm probably more towards, I don't understand why we need like high capacity magazine kind of things for anyone. I mean, still a lot of damage can be done with handguns and other kind of, rifles and things like that. So I would be compelled to hear what the arguments are, but I just don't see any need for like high capacity weapons like that. Yeah, so that's kind of what I think.
Do you think we should arm teachers?
No. And I only say that because I've been seeing so many of these. I'm at my parents' house. I've been seeing so many of these videos of kids getting in fights and stuff with their teachers. And I just could see these escalating. Like, usually when a gun is present, that's usually when more gun violence happens. So I don't know. And then too much with who would pay if something did happen. It's just very convoluted. And I don't think that teachers, they already have to do so much. I wouldn't want to put that also on them. If it has to be maybe just more guards, then so be it. But I don't think the teachers need that much more pressure with the little that they make and the shit that they deal with.
Thomas Massey did point out when Jamal Bauman was doing his little act when he was screaming, "You don't want to protect the American children." This is a dude who's armed the Nazis to the T, billions of dollars. It's okay for little children in the Donbass to get slaughtered, according to Jamal Bauman, but at home, American exceptionalism at its finest. And, Thomas Massey did point out that in areas where there were armed teachers, there's never been a situation of a school shooting. So I'm very intrigued. This is an area, Danny, I'm going to go to you because Marx, I believe, said an unarmed public is not a safe public of sort. He said something to the degree that when you disarm the public, that's an easier public to control. I'm of the belief right now that we aren't in complete digital shackles over here because we are still armed as a society. And that's why we're at the point where we're at. And I believe a lot of these situations, when you look at the situation in Nashville, when you look at the situation, all these mass shootings in schools, the number one thing they all have in common is they all have prior contact with the FBI. I don't mean to get all Alex Jones over here, but there's something to it. There is something to the MK Ultra kind of mindset where nowadays we have such a drugged up society. We have such a society where kids are on fucking edge that you don't even need to MK Ultra them. You can just flick the switch from the other side and set them off and they go do what they got to do. But what are your thoughts on the Second Amendment? Do you think we should start disarming the public? Do you think there should be assault weapons ban? Do you think teachers should have we should arm our teachers to protect our children? Give us your thoughts, Danny.
Yeah, there's so much to cover on this topic. I mean, historically, when we've looked at oppressed communities and how oppressed communities have defended themselves, the original Panthers, the symbol of the Panther came out of Louds County, Alabama, precisely from the deacons of defense and different Black liberation organizations fighting for Black self-determination. Certainly, when we talk about the Second Amendment nowadays, they present it as though every American has some type of equal right. But the thinly veiled racism within all of that, that when they're talking about the Second Amendment, they're usually talking about white suburban males or families, and there's different laws for oppressed communities, ghettoized communities. So I think we should study the Deacons for Defense. We should study the Black Panther Party for self-defense, how they approach this question of arming the oppressed, disarming the oppressor. I mean, no one talks about gun control for these trigger-happy police who continue to mow down Black and brown human beings. The statistics continue to be every 28 hours a Black person is killed by law enforcement in this country. In terms of all of the school shootings we're living, we got to peel back sociologically so many layers of alienation, of mental illness, of social isolation. I remember my two sons, 20 and 15, as they grew up, they would be online, you know, playing Call of Duty or whatever, hyper violent video games, but with this internet revolution in technology, you could play with all these dudes who are in Canada or Tennessee or Michigan or wherever. And I would walk by, you know, and they were kind of half supervised, not to tell on myself as, you know, any type of father who wasn't responsible. But I would hear like the N-bomb and all this white supremacist language and making fun of immigrants and Mexicans. And it was amazing to me within that, this video game era, the amount of racial hatred, the hate crimes, and with them going after Trump in this, you know, gossipy type sensationalistic way, they're just confirming a lot of Trump's rhetoric to be 100% true about the lamestream media. They can't beat him they couldn't beat him in the polls in 2016. Are the Democrats burying themselves again in 2024 with these weak tactics, going after Trump in his private life, but never mentioning U.S. violence against Palestinians? What happened in Libya? All the U.S. Sanctions against Zimbabwe and Vietnam and China, and of course the proxy war in Ukraine. So the most violent purveyor of violence, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, almost exactly to the date, April 4th, a year before he was assassinated, precisely for having these nuanced views of U.S. militarism as the greatest purveyor of violence. The greatest purveyor of violence, this society can only produce the degeneration and the decadence and the fascism that we're living through, because that's what this society is made of. It's a giant, capitalism is a giant school of competition, of hatred, of division, of white supremacy, of xenophobia. So I think we have to tackle that whole context if we're going to have a real rigorous debate about gun control.
All right, let's stay here. Let's talk about this right now, because you said some stuff. It's interesting, and I knew when you come on today, I was going to challenge you about a few things, because, like, you know me, I like to challenge you. A lot of people within the leftist community, Courtney, where we come from and where Danny comes from, and whatnot, they use the term fascism. They use it differently than it's intended right now. Fascism, I can tell you this as being an Italian American, because I know Mussolini and I know you've been looking into him. Fascism is simply corporatism. It's the merger of corporations and state. That's what fascism is. However, the left has tended to use this word differently. They equate fascism with racism. Now, somebody asked me when they were talking about the whole COVID experience, a person that we know, Danny, that she asked me, she says, what's going on with this COVID situation? So much information is coming out. It's 2 years into it. She says, is this a plot and a plan to kill all brown and black people out there? I said, no. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand. You mentioned that a lot of black people are killed by law enforcement in this country, and that is true. But more white people are killed every year by law enforcement in this country. Yeah, the per capita, we understand more black people, more percentage of black people and black men are killed than percentage of white men. But getting back to what I told that person who asked me about, is this a plot and a plan and a ploy to kill black and brownie? I say, no. They don't like all of us over here. The ruling class doesn't like any of us. So therefore, whitey got to go too. And in this particular situation, when it came to the vaccine, if you believe that the vaccine was a eugenics program, black people are way more hesitant to listen to their doctor than white people. When you look at the statistics of World War II, how many white men, poor white men, were killed? Millions. You know what I'm saying? So I honestly believe that when it comes to a lot of these conversations, when we talk about fascism and equating it to racism, when we talk about Donald Trump, and I have a question for you because I have your clip, I often say that we need to also pay attention first to who's the oppressor. Because when we come from this whole school that white man is the oppressor and black people the oppressed, it is completely wrong. I'm not saying that white people don't have privileges, but we have rulers. We have a ruling class, and they want us fighting each other. They're the oppressor. As long as we stay divided and we point a finger at our neighbors, then they win. And once again, not pointing out the fact that white people do have more privileges than black people, but what are we really fighting over? Shouldn't the idea say, listen, we need to stop? Because there's oppression all over the board, right? There's oppression of Jewish people. There's oppression of black people. There's oppression of poor people. There's oppression of this religion, of that religion. There's oppression all over the place, but the oppressor is one group of people. They're the people pulling the strings. And that's what I've learned to see is look at those oppressors, right? And understand that our neighbor is not the enemy. So when you use the term fascism, are you using it correctly, Danny? Let me play this clip over here. This is Danny Shaw. He was on, is this Press TV? I just have a clip out on Press TV over here. And he's asked about Donald Trump. Take a look, listen, guys.
Will be more divided with regards to the outcome of this after than it was before it happened.
There's no question. American society is completely polarized around this. Every liberal who watches CNN and MSNBC and reads the New York Times woke up today with a smile on their face. They feel like this is finally vengeance against all of Donald Trump's white supremacy, xenophobia, homophobia, and sexism. And every conservative, every Trumpite woke up today probably buying 3 or 4 more automatic weapons, whether it was in Texas or Michigan, getting ready for what they perceive as a civil war. You know, it does validate Trump and a lot of his rhetoric. Of course, he's coming from the point of view of fascism and the right wing, no different than the National Socialists who were spearheaded by Hitler. But he is an outsider. He is a political outsider, despite all of the reasons that I mentioned that we can never believe in his agenda. He does have some very real points against Washington, against this swamp. The problem is, how are we going to respect his critiques of the swamp when he's been one of the #1 swamp monsters as a real estate owner who has swindled, hustled, and fleeced how many hundreds and thousands of families?
Mr. Sepling, same question to you. Is this one of those divisive?
It's Danny. So you use the term fascism and racism, right? Aren't the Democrats in America just as fascist, if not? Aren't they tied to all the corporations? Don't they have all the funders? Same funders. And here's my question to you, and I want to hear an answer from Courtney after. Who's more racist, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Big Dog.
Yeah, I'm glad we can peel back in a dialectical fashion these comments. I mean, it's overblown in one sense to just say Trump and his followers represent some type of proto-fascism. What I was trying to get at, I just got back actually from Germany, and I was on research in Europe. And as you go from Germany to Spain to the Basque Country to Portugal, it's amazing. I was seeing more Ukrainian flags than I was seeing German flags or Spanish flags or whatever country I was in. So just to come back to that proxy war. But I did a lot of research in Dresden, in Leipzig, in Munich. I was looking at the historicity of Jewish resistance and of revolutionary Yiddish land. So I think there are historical parallels to the National Socialist Project, the way they scapegoated people. And when Trump, he came into power on campaigns of scapegoating immigrants, scapegoating Mexicans, scapegoating China, scapegoating Asians. And there's a direct connection for me from this rhetoric, this reactionary rhetoric, this racist rhetoric, white supremacist, white nationalist rhetoric, this rah, 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 the U.S. is the best and they are the other and they are invaders and make America great again. When was America ever great? When it was segregated, when it was, when quote unquote black people were in their place, because that's what they ultimately mean with a lot of that rhetoric. So when I talk about a fascist discourse, I'm talking about a scapegoating discourse, no different than what the Dominican government does against Haitians in the Dominican Republic. So August Bebel, one of the founders of Revolutionary Social Democracy, 1848, German philosopher, August Bebel said that anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. And I think that's the Trumpian appeal, that there's going to be a certain socialism, quote unquote, in the sense that certain sectors of the American working class are going to be protected in a very nativist, very jingoistic, very xenophobic way, but to otherize and to exclude and divide against the others. That's why I bring up the historical parallel with fascism in Germany and Italy and with Trumpism.
I think that as anti-imperialist leftists or people who've gone down to these countries, we understand like there is this form of like, and I'm trying to deal with it, right? I talk to all of my older conservative family members who still think that these countries were shithole countries and they don't want to accept the fact that our foreign policy is all about going into these countries, disabling them, making sure that our corporations steal their resources, and then we thrust our monetary system on top of that. And yet you have both people, both sides arguing at the border. But the reason why I say is really who's more fascist, because when we look at all these coups and we look at all these same behaviors, the left, the Democrats, are just as bad, if not sometimes even worse, than the Republicans. I know you can argue that with Obama and Libya. We can argue that with Obama and Hillary Clinton down in Honduras. We can argue the fact that their policies are just as racist or fascist, if not even more. And don't get me wrong, right now we have this whole situation where the Chinese, the China hawking from the right is just out of hand. I mean, it is ridiculous at this point. And I think it's somewhat subliminally racist because they'll say shit like, oh, Joe Biden took money from the Chinese. No, he took money from a Chinese energy company. It's not like Xi Jinping was behind the thing pulling the strings, and they have a way of lumping it all together because they're anti-communist. And they're not even really full-blown like communists over here. They have this market socialism over in China. This market's working well. Cuba's now adopting that same type of socialism. I like to call it free market socialism. So I get a little bit of that capitalist, people who want capitalism as a form of choice. They don't want to be told what to do. That's how they equate capitalism, is they have the choice, the right to pick what they wanted to pick. So did you have something to say real quick, Danny? Because you're unmuted. You're muted.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought in Cuba. You just got back from Cuba. I was in Cuba recently. It's still a stretch to say that Cuba is going the Chinese route, looking at China as some type of halfway house between socialism and capitalism. But
it is a mixed economy, though. They have free markets there, and Cuba's like 22 sectors of their economics allow privatization in. Well, they're expanding that to 222. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think since Raul Castro ushered in these economic changes in 2009, the Cubans are constantly trying to adapt because the war on Cuba, and everyone should check out that YouTube series, The War on Cuba, produced by Belly of the Beast with Danny Glover and Oliver Stone, the amazing director. The war on Cuba is an economic war, and I think you got to see that with your own eyes. Pasta and the Cubans and their economists have had to be incredibly creative and spin on a dime. But the fact that Russia is on the rise economically, in a sense, and in China, 151 countries have signed on to the Silk Road. These types of multilateral economic options give the Cubans a certain hope that these stultifying sanctions, this anti-human blockade that has suffocated Cuba for so long, the fact that we have Lula back in the driver's seat of Brazil, we hear Argentina and Alberto Fernandez, they want to join the BRICS. All the Middle Eastern nations are talking about building the BRICS. We saw the Saudis sit down with the Persians, with the Iranians, brokered by China. I mean, we could have never imagined this post-1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Xi Jinping, in a straight-up middle finger to Washington, is going to Moscow. So it's this international context that I think gives the Cuban people hope. We saw Miguel Diaz-Canel was in Moscow about 2 months ago. So, and it's this rise of unipolarity, of multipolarity, coming really spearheaded by the Venezuelans, who've been so thoroughly blockaded and beat down. And that's what sanctions are. You want to starve the people of a historically underdeveloped economy, an economy oriented towards export and exploitation by the U.S. and the European neo-colonizing actors. The U.S. has tried to punish all of these countries. More than 30 countries in the world are sanctioned, but nowadays there's the club of the sanctioned, and they can find one another. So anytime that Tehran finds Beijing and Beijing finds Caracas, and of course Caracas already knows where La Paz is and where Managua is, and look at Lopez Obrador in Mexico. So I think Cuba was the spearhead, but we now see all of South America and the global South on the move, and that's very encouraging.
I think for us as foreign policy minded people, and the work we do, and you've been doing this work for so much longer than me, I've just I'm at the tip of the iceberg over here going deeper, and I'm going to continue to go back to Cuba. I'm going to be there for May Day, and I'm going to go to Argentina this year and observe their elections. I think it's amazing, but I think in our position that we have a different perspective, because we saw the way Trump had this war on Latin America. I mean, a week before his presidency is set to end, he slaps these sanctions back on Cuba. He labels them as a state sponsor of terrorism. He tried to whack Maduro. He hired Elliot Abrams, John Bolton, neocons. We see this here. We hear the way he talks, this anti-socialist talk and whatnot. And once again, the socialism that we see in the United States, right? This cappuccino communism, this culture war shit. It's not the economics and the Marxism we see in the Latin America, where it's all about the worker. It's all about the proletariat. It's all about national sovereignty. It's all about resource sovereignty. You know what I'm saying? So when we see this, we have this little bit different perspective about Trump that we can only say, man, he seems to be getting away with this because it's racially motivated, because the people in his base that he talks to, they accept it. They accept those people as socialist others, right? You know what I'm saying? It's okay to sanction and starve out a socialist communist country like Cuba because they're the others, right? And I think that gives us a different perspective. But just because the Democrats have different rhetoric, right? That doesn't make it okay, because in their policies, man, they're bad. Sometimes they're even worse. I mean, Libya, holy shit. I saw a meme of Libya where 5 black women are all tied together on the ground because there's an actual slave trade going on. But Courtney, while you're here, before you get on out, question, are you frozen again? She's frozen again.
I can go in on the Dems as well, the corporate Dixiecrats. I mean, if I ever come across for 1 second as somehow being soft on the liberals, I mean, my mother would never forgive me, and my ancestral legacy going back to Scotland and Ireland and across the European theater and this struggle against liberalism. No, I think that's what the Obama phenomenon was in 2008. From the perspective of the anti-war movement, we had such massive demonstrations in the Bush years. Then all of a sudden you put this Obama face, this more diplomatic face, this more multicultural face, what have you. The face of capitalism changed. I was actually in Cape Verde the day that Obama assumed office in Western Africa. And even the Cape Verdeans and the Western Africans, they were so enthusiastic. It's a whole new world, and Obama is going to bring us freedom. And what did Obama bring for Libya? What did Obama bring for Honduras? What did Obama bring with all the droning of Yemen and in Palestine and Somalia? So whether it's Tweedledee, Tweedledum, as Malcolm X framed it, and I think we should really pick apart this formulation. Malcolm is more correct than ever. The Democrats represent that fox, and the Republicans historically
in the hen house, right? The fox in the hen house, he can get in there and he cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, the wolf is the Republican, and you can see from far away the aesthetics are more like open racism. Often I'm not trying to dismiss every, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican. I'm pointing out the contradictions in both camps. And if they're so divided across the aisle, but when it comes to Venezuela, they're very united. When it comes up to standing up for a round of applause for Juan Guaido or whatever puppet they try to put into power so they can steal and siphon off Venezuelan oil and gas reserves. You even seen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez standing up for Juan Guaido, and these social democrats of the Bernie Sanders ilk. When have they ever stood up for Cuba or Nicaragua or Venezuela or China or Vietnam?
I got to stop you 1 second. They all, the squad, the one good vote they did, they all voted against the Renacer Act. You know, and that's when I was screaming for Tulsi, like, Tulsi, you better get your ass in here and say stuff. They're trying to sweat out and starve Nicaraguan children over here. Do not be silent on this. But really quickly, Danny, just answer my question, though, real quick, and then we'll get to Courtney before we lose her again and she goes to a different room. If you had a gun to your head and you had to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, who are you voting for?
Oh, I'm turning that gun around. You're not going to trap me. I would say I think the Black Alliance for Peace, has a very important slogan. The Democrats want war with Russia. Republicans want war with China. Both parties equally, sometimes it's more effective to go the law and order Ronald Reagan route. And then after that, you bring it back to the Clinton era. So it's just politics time again. To quote Dead Prez, one of the great conscious, righteous hip hop groups of my generation. And Dead Prez has that whole song, Politics. Even if Obama wins, Uncle Sam ain't my friend. So it's politics. It's bamboozling and hoodwinking us. And we should go through the record of every president, because they've all been war criminals, whether it was the Christmas bombing of Panama in '89, the 1983 invasion of Grenada. I mean, these arrogant imperialists think they can invade any part of the world at any moment, quoting Elon Musk, to coup whoever they want. We'll coup anywhere, they said. So we live in a world where an Elon Musk is worth some $230 billion. That's 4 times the gross domestic product of the Dominican Republic, of many countries. So we now live in a world, capitalism is so quote unquote successful that individuals have 5 times the economic power of entire peoples and countries.
Well, the only thing I would argue over there is that I'm not one to get caught up in the isms, right? Capitalism, communism, socialism. I always believe it's about elitism. I always believe there's a ruling class sitting over any system, and they will manipulate and control any systems out there if they want to. And in fact, we pointed out the Chinese kind of mixed economy, where they have like some sectors of their economics involved in capitalism to let the free market come in, but they're controlling certain state entities like healthcare, infrastructure, power, and whatnot. I think that combination of both is the answer. But here's the quagmire we're facing, because I'm the same way. Turn that gun around. You ain't going to have me vote for either one. How do we get across to conservatives that are still stuck? Because I don't like to call them racist, because I don't believe that they are openly racist. I believe they're subconsciously racist, because they were taught, they were programmed, they were educated in the schools. Empire education, as our boy Johnny Mayorka liked to call it, Johnny Tsunami. They were trained to be this way. They were taught to be this way. They were always taught there's an us and there's a them. So what's the challenge? How do we get across to these people? Because I've hit a brick wall right now, because they're still, the party of individual responsibility, the party that is all about, the conservative side, they don't want to take any responsibility for America's past and current foreign policy. So how do we get across to these conservatives or these independent-minded people, thinking people, if we kind of label them a fascist or racist, what method should we use to talk to the people on the right who have an open mind, maybe to understand what's going on? How do we educate them on what we see and get across to them that they've been duped and they've been fooled this whole time? Go ahead, Danny, and then we'll follow up with Courtney.
Courtney, you don't want to go first? I feel like I'm monopolizing the air.
Well, I was struggling with my rural Wi-Fi running all over my house. So my mom picked up the phone, and then I guess the Wi-Fi doesn't work. So sorry. Yeah, I mean, sure. Thanks. I'll hop in. I mean, I live in a rural area, or always have. And, hanging out with Republicans has always been just very normal, natural. People who are your friends, you see them, they work at the grocery store, whatever, the bank. And only recently, I feel like, has it become so divisive that you can't even have a friend who is in a different political party. You know, I feel like that's something very recent. And I feel like that's because we don't have hobbies anymore. We don't have, really, we put so much of ourselves in our labels that we're not out living lives. And I think a big turnoff to connect to the right is that the left loves these labels. Everybody is a Nazi. Everything is fascism. Everything is racism. And that's not true. Like where I live, you know, if you're a poor working class person, there are plenty of poor people who live in trailers right down the road. Like they have a lot of the same struggles. So I think it's first, like, stopping. I really just think that this approach to say that we've gotten to this point of like a lazy, I feel like, analysis of things. So then we label everything as being racist rather than looking at how maybe this structure also hurts other poor white people, and also understanding that we need to be in community with each other. So constantly throwing these labels at people is going to make people tune out. And so I think just, you know, being more normal, having more just normal general discussions about the things that connect us would be a good place to start, because right now we just love to focus on where we don't see eye to eye and making those as extreme as possible.
Danny, she put out a very important point over here. I think there's a struggle between people who are trying to preach racial oppression, recognition of racial oppression, versus a solidarity. What brings us together? I mean, what Fred Hampton would really preached in the Black Panthers back then really preaches the commonalities, the struggle we all have together. And I feel like we've gotten away from that. I think that was evident and clear in the Rage Against the War Machine rally. We saw a lot of people from the Answer Coalition that were upset at what we were doing. They thought that we were having open racist people up there on that stage when we were all just trying to get together for the commonality of ending this crazy, senseless war, where we're not only are we just, we're pushing death and destruction, and we're promoting it and we're funding it, but we're also like not spending any money at home, where we could, a lot of people on the streets, there's a lot, we have close to 750,000 homeless people on the streets, and we're spending that money over there. But don't you think there has been this push to say, okay, we need to focus on racial oppression? And the reason why I think it's done is because therefore you can push aside people who have the same commonalities, and you can be divisive about it rather than say, what's the commonality? Why should we come together? Poor white people, poor black people, oppressed people across this nation. Why don't we focus on that? Don't you think that there has been some sort of kind of plan to make sure that the racism card is thrown in there because it's really more divisive?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there to unpack. And I'm glad you mentioned Fred Hampton. And Fred Hampton said, if you're afraid of socialism, you're afraid of yourself. And, I think it's important to keep all these conversations open. The spirit of Courtney's comments are 100% on point. And that's why I always appreciate, I come from a very leftist training, Marxist, Leninist training. So to meet with you all and expand my own horizons has been important. I think when you talk to everyday people and explain what Nicaragua has represented and what Cuba has represented, what the Bolivians are doing right now, and that there's this Bolivarian project, which is all about South American unity, and that the South Americans don't have to be pillaged and sacked from the outside. And with the leadership of the Rafael Correas and the Evo Morales and Lula as well, and whole new generation of not sellout leadership, but unifying leadership. And that's why Democrat or Republican, that's why they've targeted these countries with these genocidal sanctions and economic wars and hybrid wars. We have to have those conversations. And historically, racism has been the number one component to divide us. Look how segregated New York City continues to be. Look how segregated, and not just along black-white lines, but of course along class lines. So we have a ton of work ahead of us, and we don't want to dismiss anybody. I come from what we see every day in Ohio and in the Rust Belt with this opioid epidemic. I come from that, social reality. I hear a lot of my own family members with a very gung-ho American exceptionalist, Monroe Doctrine, American dreaming type mentality. And I try to very patiently take a step back. But there's a certain American exceptionalism that is pure arrogance, and I think there's a huge racist component to it. Like, I'll be fresh back from Venezuela. I go to Venezuela once or twice a year to do work, and I'll have family members lecturing me on Venezuela because they watch CNN or they watch MSNBC or they read the Wall Street Journal. And the arrogance to me is like, well, you've never been to Venezuela. You know, you're just going off of what you hear from either the liberal wing or the Fox wing, the conservative wing of the ruling class, both dead set against the Venezuelan people and their resource nationalism. You know, like that clever bumper sticker against the war of aggression against Iraq. And we can't say the Iraq war. It was a U.S. unfettered war of aggression, invading and occupying and sanctioning the Iraqi people. It wasn't the Iraq war. It was the U.S. war of aggression against Iraq. But that clever bumper sticker, how did our oil get under their sand, reflects, again, this imperial arrogance. And so many of us poor white people, because if we're going to talk about poor white people, we can begin right here in the family that I come from. And it's amazing how ideologically they've turned us against any of these projects of emancipation. Like, you talk to my everyday family members and neighbors and people I grew up with, they're not going to give you one positive word about China or Venezuela or any economic alternative, because they've been so thoroughly indoctrinated by the idiot tube, by the algorithms on social media. So it's really an upward hill climb to raise this consciousness. But certainly any program like yours, Pasta, any opportunity to sit down with our people, you know, for me as a professor, as an educator, it's not what I do in the classroom. I mean, the true battle it's in the classroom as well. I mean, they're trying to shut down African-American history in Florida and Arizona. These are book burners. It brings me back to the Reichstag in 1934. And I don't think that's an overblown historical comparison. I mean, they're banning any type of understanding of indigenous history and Black history. And that's what we have to get up in there and try to create this resistance.
Yeah, and at the other side too, they're trying to indoctrinate kids with a lot of other shit that should be held in the household that the state should never be in charge of. I don't, you know, I'm saying we were going to talk about some of the swimmer. What's her name? Courtney Riley
Gaines.
Riley Gaines, and you know, she went up and talked about this. You know, she was second place to the transgender athlete who took all these medals and whatnot. You know, I can see both sides of the whole situation. And that's why I have this open-minded, you know, kind of mentality where I don't bag on capitalism, because I know what capitalism means to a lot of people out there. It means choices. I mean, they do have this sophomoric, comical view about communism and socialism, but I've always been calling for a mixed economy. You know what I'm saying? And I think that what China is doing right now is just the blueprint of how to, you know, succeed economically as a country. And the way they're going into these other countries, they're going in with their checkbook, right? Not with a missile, with a gun and whatnot. Courtney, before we get to that next thing, and I'm going to get Danny out of here because I know he's got to get out of here soon, because we do got to ask about Haiti. Before the show started, we have like 10 minutes before we're warming up. I played Tennessee to kind of give a little play into what Courtney and I were talking about in the Tennessee legislative body in the assembly. But I also played a song by Boss and J. Cole. Boss is a Haitian hip hop star. He's from America, but he's Haitian. So I want to get an update about what's going on in Haiti. But really quickly, Courtney, just answer the question. If you did have a gun to your head, or you can answer the question, who's more racist, Trump or Biden, or is it equal?
Biden. Well, gosh, it's so hard because personally, like, Trump has done a lot of Central Park 5, you know, housing discrimination. He's got a lot of things, but Biden has put his racism into law. So multiple times through various acts, the drug acts, 1994 crime bill. I mean, you know, all of these things. So I would say Biden. Yeah.
You know what? I'm glad you said that. And the reason why is that I don't think that Biden is necessarily more racist than, you know, Donald Trump. You know what I'm saying? Donald Trump with this whole new Mexican thing, man. This shit is just like, you know, I don't give a shit. He's not saying it's racially motivated. He says it's motivated by stopping, once again, the drug cartels coming in with fentanyl. Let's not put any blame or any responsibility on the backs of big pharma and the doctors here who turned our citizens into addicts, who gave them Adderall and all these opioids like it was Pez candy and turned them into addicts. Let's put it on the Chinese and the Mexican cartels. Once again, policy-wise, that's racist. And what I'm trying to say is that some of the most racist things we can do as a society is go around and bomb indigenous people in their own land and not give two damns about it and have the public consent to it. So I don't think it's necessarily that Biden is more racist than Trump. I think the answer is A or B. But I asked that to leftists because a lot of friends we know justified voting for Biden, saying that they were stopping the impending fascism of Donald Trump coming in. Meanwhile, Joe Biden there hasn't been a war that Joe Biden hasn't liked. He pushed Iraq on the floor of the Senate when he was in the Senate. And he even said
Jill Biden just invited the Iowa team that won the NAAC,
second place, LSU won,
to the White House, which I feel like if Trump had done that, many people would have interpreted that as being quite racist. So a lot of that's a microaggression, but yeah, liberals love to do those kind of things and then say like, oh, I'm not racist. So, I think I also think that there's something different about someone who claims to be there for the Black community and for all different communities of color, and then blatantly making laws that go against that. So, I think, at least Trump doesn't put on a veneer to actually pretend to care. So I think that that's kind of a bit of a difference for me too. I don't like being lied to.
The fox versus the wolf. The fox versus the wolf. It's that Malcolm X, metaphor. You're going to appreciate the racist you can see openly versus the one, that white paternalism of these woke Democrats. They think because they put in the NBA a few little murals, all of a sudden that's some type of actual gain against police brutality, against all the police murders. It's just complete window dressing, liberal symbolism. It's sick. And we know where we stand with the right wing many times. I mean, for me, because sometimes I'll quiz my students like 3-4 months into the semester, and I'll say, hey, you've been listening to me and the readings, and am I here? Am I a Democrat or am I a Republican? And they kind of know instinctively that I'm neither, but they've never heard that you can actually be something beyond that. So for me, that question is almost an insult. Biden, Trump, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, two servants of capital, certainly a different aesthetic, a different orientation, but at the end of the day, a relentless war against any projects of self-determination coming from South America, the Caribbean, Africa, or Asia. Just unrepentant hatred for any alternative to capitalist exploitation. And that's why I think we have such a duty to follow very closely what's happening in China, what's happening in Haiti, what's happening in Russia domestically. They only give us one side. For the audience, have you ever heard one positive word about Cuba? Have you ever heard one positive word about Venezuela? Have you ever heard one positive utterance from the full gamut of mainstream corporate media about Haiti? Everything is negative. And that's the type of work that we try to do. The Haitian leadership, the Haitian anti-imperialist leadership, they led a rebellion in 2021. I was there off and on throughout that rebellion. And they always said to me, Danielle, the most important thing is the ideological war, the informational war. People don't know that Haiti is worth something fighting for. Even ourselves, we've internalized. We want to migrate to Miami. We want to migrate to Brooklyn. What do we have in our homeland? So that's the type of solidarity work that I've tried to do in Haiti, showing the other Haiti, the ancestral Haiti, the collective Haiti, the Haiti that's resisted white supremacy and U.S. imperialism now since the 1804 revolution, a revolution that still has an incredible legacy. The Haitians are the original internationalists. They were supporting the Bolivarian project, the self-determination of Gran Colombia. So there's all these different international connections. And on my way out, because I got a family stuff now, but the future of Haiti runs through Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. The future of Haiti runs through Lima and Managua. It's an international future to the extent that the Haitians can sever this abusive umbilical cord with the core group powers, the United States, the United Nations, the OAS, the same actors, France and the junior neocolonial partners of the U.S., the same actors who who have already invaded full-scale 3 invasions of Haiti in the last century. Now Canada and potentially the Bahamas, they're spearheading a new war against Haiti. There's the Global Fragility Act, which is the legislative language that Biden can use to now try to go into Haiti. It's another example of humanitarian imperialism, the same thing they did in Libya. It was a dirty war against the Syrian people. So this is the anti-imperialist orientation we should all have. And we have to make all these new connections. So to just relentlessly critique China as though this incredible historical experiment had nothing to offer us, to me is the height, the essence of elitism, of arrogance, of white supremacy. I think we are living through the end of U.S. international dominance, the end of the U.S. unipolar project. And that's a reason to be very, very excited, very, very encouraged. And the Haitians form a vital piece of that.
Well, let's not get too carried away, because I don't think the hegemon's going to go down without a fight, Danny. And I'm fearful that they'll try to start another war. I think they're exhausting themselves in the Ukraine region over there, and they're going to bring it back home to Latin and South America, understanding that the Chinese and the Russians are there. And I think they're going to concentrate a lot of their energy over there. That's why you have either DeSantis or Trump already amping up this kind of manufacturing consent to go into Mexico to stop what's going on with the drug cartels. And really, to tell you, that's the wolf in sheep's clothing, because really, to tell you the truth, it's about their lithium. It's about them being independent. And I think they just want to have a reason to get in there. But I hope when you go to Haiti, you report back to us. Thank you so much. I do feel, and tell me if I'm right or wrong before you get out of here, that there are 2 countries in particular that the United States Western Empire will never let their boot off the neck. That is, number 1, Cuba, because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that's why I kind of promote the fact that this isn't Castro. This is Daniel, what is his name?
Miguel Diaz-Canel.
Yes, Canal. Like, I don't even fucking say his name right. I get nervous and stuff. It's a different leader. He didn't put the missiles on the island, right? So this is a different way forward, like where, some people might justify what happened. A lot of times it's looked as political baggage. And the reason why I think a lot of lawmakers in Florida, and I'm not using the term gusanos anymore because I want to be able to talk to these people and ask them what their end game is. I think that Cuba is one of those countries that they won't let their boot off. I think Haiti's the other one because of the Bolivarian Revolution. And they're going to show, don't you ever, push back against Western Empire. How dare you slaves revolt against the empire? So those are 2 countries. And you've always said that Haiti is not poor. Haiti is rich in resources, but it's extracted like it's going out of style. What are your thoughts? Do you think that they have a chance to get the boot off the neck of Western Empire? Or for what you see, what you just talked about, are they gearing up to go back in there again?
Yeah, no, the Canadians have already gone in with their supersonic jets and their warships. It's not a full-scale invasion like the 2003 to 2018 UN Blue Helmet occupation, in which these UN troops opened fire on Haitian popular mobilizations in Cité Soleil and Solino, in Fort National. I've interviewed different survivors of the UN massacres. So they try to present to us in the West this, image of the UN and that they're just peacemakers, but it's always been an anti-revolutionary, pro-imperialist project whenever the UN has dealt with Haiti. Right now, it's very difficult for the Haitians to mobilize, especially in Port-au-Prince. There's these gangs that are functioning as the paramilitary arm of the state. In Cuba, you're 100% correct. And it wasn't just the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a NATO missile crisis. It was a Turkey missile crisis. It was a German missile crisis, because they always tell us that Khrushchev and the Soviets put missiles in outside of Havana. But what about all the NATO US missiles pointed at the Soviet Union? So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We should unpack the different layers, certainly of this quote unquote Cuban missile crisis. But I think terminology is so important. So my man Wyatt has arrived right on cue. So glad y'all got to see, Cuba with your own eyes. We need to have more exchanges with the Cuban people. The Cuban people have held strong when everyone gave up on socialism and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The Cuban people's caloric intake was cut in half. They were only getting on average 1,500 calories. There was no soap. There was no shampoo in Cuba. That's what the blockade is, to deprive the everyday people of food. of hope, but somehow the Cubans have held on. It's not easy. And I think we have to be nuanced and understanding what Cuban youth and Cuban families are going through every day. But we say, you know, U.S. out of Cuba, shut down Guantanamo, which this liberal Fox promised his first days in office in 2008 in Guantanamo Bay. There's this military base of infamy and of humiliation and of U.S. imperial arrogance is still right there. So good to see Wyatt. Great to participate. Thank you, Courtney and Pasta, and all power to the people. Peace.
Dan, we love you, baby. We'll see you soon. Next adventure. I'm glad I get to have a show and have all my friends on here. Look at this. I just want to take a picture. I got Courtney Banks, Wyatt Reed, and Danny Shaw. 3 people I love to death. Danny, get on out of here. We'll see you. We'll see you soon. I got to tell you about Guantanamo Bay. There's some shit coming out of the truther community you probably don't know about, but I'll tell you guys another day. That was Danny.